Sammy, the smallest squirrel in the chestnut forest, feels like an outsider. All he wants is to fit in and play with the other young squirrels. But when a charming yet devious fox named Sylvester, better known as Sly, starts whispering about amazing hidden treats at the forbidden forest edge, Sammy's longing for acceptance pulls him into a dangerous game. Can Sammy, overlooked and underestimated, find the courage to expose Sly's true colors and rescue his friends from the fox's cunning trap? Sammy and the Sly Fox, a story from the Chestnut Forest written by Rrocket White. Chapter 1, The Gathering at Dawn. The first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky. It was a soft pearly gray that slowly blushed into delicate shades of pink and gold. In the heart of the chestnut forest, the towering trees still clung to the last vestiges of night's cool embrace. Their leaves rustled with a gentle, waking sigh. But as the sun, a brilliant copper coin, began its slow ascent above the distant ridge, warmth seeped into the air, chasing away the lingering chill. Suddenly, a flurry of motion stirred high in the ancient oaks and beeches. First one, then two, then dozens of furry, bushy-tailed shapes erupted from their cozy nests. They scampered down the rough bark of the tree trunks, their tiny claws making quick, scratching sounds. Agile and quick, the squirrels leapt from branch to branch, chattering with an energy that seemed to swell with the rising sun. They didn't scatter widely, though. Instead, with an almost choreographed purpose, they darted downwards, gathering on the damp, leaf-strewn ground beneath the protective canopy of the forest's oldest trees. Their bright, beady eyes scanned their surroundings, and their twitching noses sniffed the morning air. A silent anticipation hung among them. As more and more squirrels arrived, a distinct group formed on the ground, nestled safely under the spreading branches. The older gray-furred squirrels, their whiskers long and their tails bushy, with wisdom gained from many seasons. They chattered among themselves, a flurry of quick, high-pitched squeaks and soft chirps, discussing the day's plans. Their discussions seemed to revolve around the best nut-gathering spots, the freshest acorn caches, and perhaps even the safest routes to avoid Sylvester, the fox that sometimes wandered too close to the forest's edge. Among the bustling assembly, a tiny figure sat quietly at the edge of the main group. His fur was a vibrant, bright brown, almost overshadowed by the much larger adults. This was Sammy, the smallest squirrel in the entire chestnut forest. He wasn't just small in stature. He was a bit younger than most of the other young squirrels, too. Sammy's ears, though small, were keenly alert, swiveling to catch every nuance of the elders' conversation. He listened intently, his bright, dark eyes fixed on the older squirrels, trying to piece together their important pronouncements. After a moment, a slightly larger reddish-brown squirrel, with a bold, adventurous glint in his eye, scampered over and nudged Sammy gently with his nose. Sammy turned, a small smile appearing on his tiny face. "Good morning, Rusty," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chatter of the older squirrels. After the morning ritual of the adults discussing the day's foraging, from the juiciest wild berries ripening on the bushes to the best places to unearth buried nuts and the freshest dew-kissed shoots, a hush gradually fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to the most venerable of their kind. He was a magnificent, stately gray squirrel, his fur the color of a winter cloud, and his most distinguishing feature was a truly impressive, very long white beard that seemed to flow down from his chin, a testament to his many, many years and countless wisdoms. He cleared his throat with a soft, rustling sound. "All right, everybody," he announced, his voice a gentle, deep rumble that carried easily through the quieted crowd. "Let the day begin. Chapter 2, Mother Knows Best." With his words, a wave of renewed energy swept through the group. The older squirrels, with their tails held high and their eyes alight with purpose, began to disperse. They scurried off in various directions, heading towards their adult jobs, the serious work of gathering, storing, and preparing for the seasons ahead. Meanwhile, the younger squirrels, full of boundless energy and a palpable excitement for the day's adventures, scampered off in the opposite direction, their tiny chirps and chitters already sounding like laughter. They were eager to dive into their games of chase, hide and seek among the roots, and acrobatics on the lowest branches, leaving the serious matters to their elders. As the last of the adult squirrels disappeared into the underbrush, and the excited squeaks of the other young ones faded into the distance, Sammy and Rusty suddenly looked around. An undeniable quiet settled over the spot where they sat. They were the only two left, a small island in the swiftly emptying space beneath the ancient trees. Rusty, always quick to action, bounced on his hind legs, his tail twitching with eagerness. "Sammy," he chittered, his eyes bright, "everyone's going to play a game of kick the nut. You should come along. It's going to be a great game." Sammy watched his friend, a faint wistfulness in his small eyes. He always loved playing with Rusty. He shook his head slightly. "I'll be along in a moment, Rusty," Sammy replied, his voice soft. He then turned and began to scamper purposefully towards his own tree, a familiar, sturdy oak with particularly thick branches perfect for climbing. Without another thought, his friend Rusty, eager not to miss out on the start of the game, gave a quick nod and then bounded away, a flash of reddish-brown fur disappearing into the rustling leaves to join the other squirrels. Sammy scampered swiftly up the familiar trunk of his oak tree, his tiny claws finding purchase in the rough bark. He moved with a practiced ease, reaching the hidden entrance to his nest, a cozy hollow nestled deep within a cluster of broad leaves and sturdy branches. Inside he found his mother, her soft gray fur ruffled from a recent nap, her eyes still a little sleepy. "Sammy, is that you, dear?" she chirped, blinking at him. "Why, what are you doing back here so soon? Shouldn't you be out playing with the others by now?" Sammy hesitated, nudging a loose acorn shell with his nose. He curled his tail tightly around his small paws. I'm not going to go play today, Mom," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up, as if the words were too heavy to meet her gaze. "I already know I probably wouldn't be able to anyway. They usually don't let me join their games." His small shoulders slumped just a little, the memory of past exclusions a familiar ache. His mother listened patiently, her sleepy expression fading to one of gentle understanding, yet firm resolve. She nudged him with her nose, her whiskers tickling his ear. "Now, Sammy," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I understand it can be tough sometimes, but you can't just give up before you even try. You need to go out there whether you want to or not, because you shouldn't be just sitting in the nest all day. Fresh air, sunshine, and trying to make friends are important even when it's difficult. Now off you go." Sammy thought about it for a moment, his mother's words echoing in his ears. He remembered the feel of the sun on his fur, the thrill of chasing Rusty through the branches, and the way the wind felt when he leaped from tree to tree. Maybe, just maybe, today would be different. A spark of hope, coupled with the memory of fun, ignited within him. He realized with a sudden lightness in his chest how much fun it would be to join his friends. With newfound determination he turned, scampered out of the nest, and ran off towards the sounds of playful chitters and excited squeaks, eager to join the game. Chapter 3: The King of the Game. When Sammy finally got to the place where all of the young squirrels were playing Kick the Nut, a relatively flat area under a cluster of sturdy oak trees, perfect for rolling an acorn around, his small heart that had just been filled with anticipation seemed to shrink a little. All the other young squirrels were there, chasing a large, smooth acorn, their tails flicking with excitement. And then he saw him. Standing a little apart, his chest puffed out, was a squirrel with a much darker, scruffier coat and eyes that seemed to hold a permanent sneer. This was Gus. Sammy felt an immediate wave of sadness wash over him. He knew with a sinking feeling that Gus was always picking on everybody smaller than himself. And Sammy, being the smallest squirrel in the entire chestnut forest, knew that he was exactly the kind of target Gus liked to torment. Sammy, still holding on to that flicker of hope, finally reached the other squirrels. He ran up to them, his small body practically quivering with excitement and the desire to play. Just as he got close, Rusty, who had been bouncing around the edge of the game, saw him coming. His face lit up, and he scampered over to meet Sammy. "Sammy, you made it," Rusty chittered, his tail flicking joyfully. "Great! Come on, join the game. We need another player." But before Sammy could even take a step towards the rolling acorn, a harsh, grating voice cut through the air. "Oh, I don't think so." "Nope, nope, nope, you hold it right there." It was Gus. He stood with his paws on his hips, his dark eyes narrowed, casting a long, intimidating shadow over Sammy. "No," Gus declared, his voice loud and final. "He's not playing." A couple of the other squirrels paused their game, looking between Gus and Sammy. One small female squirrel, named Pip, timidly chirped, "Oh, let him play, Gus. He's just small. He won't hurt anything." Another nodded in agreement, suggesting he can just be on our team. But Gus merely scoffed, puffing out his chest even further. "No, no, no," he repeated, his voice rising in volume, leaving no room for argument. His gaze swept over the other young squirrels, and a sigh seemed to ripple through the group. They knew Gus. When he made up his mind, there was simply no changing it. Their tails drooped, and they collectively mumbled, "No, no, no," in quiet tones, echoing Gus's firm command. They just accepted it as the way things were when Gus was around, and didn't bother to press the point further. Chapter 4: A Flash of Speed. Sammy stood there for a moment, his small body trembling, not with fear, but with a sudden surge of defiance. The sting of Gus's words and the other's silent agreement hardened something inside him. His bright eyes, usually so timid, now held a spark of determination. Instead of turning away in sadness, Sammy, with an unexpected burst of speed that surprised even himself, darted forward. He ran straight over to where the nut lay on the ground, the very acorn they had been kicking for their game. In a flash, he scooped it up in his tiny paws. A collective gasp, a chorus of surprised squeaks, rose from the other young squirrels. They stopped their playful chasing, their jaws dropping. No one had ever dared to defy Gus like this. But Sammy didn't wait for their reaction. With the nut clutched tightly, he took off running, a blur of brown fur. The biggest and most athletic of the squirrels, still reeling from their surprise, quickly snapped out of it and gave chase. "Get him!" Gus roared, leading the charge. They scrambled after Sammy, their legs pumping furiously. They would dive, trying to tackle him or snatch the nut, only to miss and tumble harmlessly onto the soft forest floor, sending leaves scattering. Sammy was too quick, too agile. He zipped and veered, often running directly between their bewildered legs, leaving them stumbling over each other. He twisted, turned, and dodged with an almost impossible speed, weaving through the trees and around roots. No matter how hard they tried, how many squirrels joined the pursuit, they simply couldn't catch him. As Sammy finally slowed down, the acorn still tucked safely in his paws, the other squirrels panted, giving up the chase, some still dusting themselves off from a missed lunge. Rusty, seeing Sammy's incredible display of speed and agility, felt a surge of hope. He scampered over to Gus, his eyes wide with excitement. "See, Gus?" Rusty chittered, gesturing toward Sammy. "He can play. He's really fast. He'd be great at kick the nut." But Gus was still fuming. His fur was ruffled, his tail twitched sharply, and his eyes were narrowed into angry slits. He didn't care about Sammy's speed. He cared about being defied. When Sammy stopped running around, catching his breath and looking hopefully towards the group, Gus stomped over to him, his voice low and menacing, meant only for Sammy to hear. "That doesn't change anything," Gus growled, standing over Sammy. "You still can't play. Now get on." Sammy's small shoulders slumped. The flicker of defiance and hope that had animated him moments before was extinguished, replaced by a familiar ache of rejection. He didn't argue, didn't try to plead. With a heavy sigh, Sammy hung his head, the acorn still in his grasp for a moment before he let it fall to the ground. He shuffled away from the edge of the game, found a quiet spot under a broad chestnut leaf, and sat down. His eyes followed the other squirrels as they resumed their game of kick the nut, their joy's squeaks and chitters now sounding distant and hollow to him. He watched them play, a solitary small figure observing the fun he wasn't allowed to be a part of. Chapter 5. Whispers in the shadows as Sammy sat there, a small, dejected lump of fur under the chestnut leaf. He tried to make himself invisible. His heart still ached from Gus's harsh words, and the fun of the game seemed miles away. He watched the other squirrels dart and leap, their joyous sounds now a source of quiet misery for him. His gaze drifted aimlessly across the bustling activity, and then something caught his eye, something that made his fur prickle with an instinctual alarm. Moving with a deliberate, silent grace at the very edge of the playing area, near the shadow-dappled roots of the biggest oak, was a reddish-brown shape. It was Sylvester, the fox whose very name in the forest was often shortened to simply Sly. He was well known for his cunning and his quiet approaches. Sly moved like a ripple in a still pond, his sharp eyes gleaming, his sleek body low to the ground, almost blending with the fallen leaves and shadows. The other squirrels, completely engrossed in their game of kick the nut, were too busy chasing and chittering to notice the danger creeping closer. Sammy watched, his small body tensing. He saw Sly pause, his head cocked, his gaze fixed on one of the children, a young squirrel named Nutmeg, who was just then scrambling for the acorn near a low bush. Then, with a final stealthy movement, Sly approached Nutmeg from behind the bush. His nose twitched, and he dipped his head, getting very close to Nutmeg's ear. And then Sly whispered something, his voice a low, almost purring sound, directly into the young squirrel's ear. Sammy, still a silent, unmoving shadow beneath his chestnut leaf, watched the unsettling scene unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. He saw Nutmeg, the young squirrel who had just been playing so happily, suddenly stand up very straight, her tail beginning to flick with an almost frantic joy. Her face, usually bright and open, now wore a look of sheer, unadulterated happiness, as if Sly the Fox had just told her the most wonderful secret in the world. Before Sammy could even process what was happening, Nutmeg turned, her tiny legs already blurring into motion. She didn't look back at her friends, or at the game, or even at Sly. Instead, she took off running with incredible speed, not towards the safety of the deeper forest, but in the exact opposite direction. towards the very edge of the chestnut forest, heading rapidly towards an area where no one, especially not young squirrels, was ever supposed to go. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones by the elders, a place known to be full of unseen dangers and unknown territories. Sammy watched, a cold dread beginning to curl in his stomach as Nutmeg, seemingly enchanted, disappeared among the dense undergrowth at the forest's boundary. Chapter 6 Promises and Secrets. Without a second thought, the cold dread in Sammy's stomach turned into a desperate urgency. His small legs coiled, and then he sprang forward. He had to stop Nutmeg. He took off running as fast as his tiny paws could carry him, a brown streak aimed directly towards the spot where Nutmeg had vanished. As Sammy raced past the edge of the playing area, he flashed by Sly the Fox. Sly was already on the move, his sleek body gliding stealthily, not towards the edge of the forest, but over to another young squirrel who was momentarily distracted, trying to dislodge an acorn from a patch of moss. Sly approached this squirrel, a young male with slightly ruffled fur, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "Hello," Sly whispered, his breath warm and strangely inviting against the squirrel's ear. "I know a place at the very edge of the chestnut forest that has the best and juiciest berries you've ever tried. Plump, sweet, bursting with flavor, and nobody else knows about them." The young squirrel, whose name was Billy, froze, his paws hovering over the mossy acorn. He turned, his eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and caution. "The edge of the chestnut forest?" Billy mumbled, his voice hesitant. "But, no. We're not supposed to go to that side of the chestnut forest. The adults say it's dangerous." Sly let out a low, knowing chuckle, a sound like rustling dry leaves. He leaned in closer, his voice even softer, full of false understanding. "Ah, that's because they don't want you to know that they're there, little one," Sly murmured, his gaze sweeping around as if sharing a grand secret. "They don't want you to be in on the secret of those delicious berries. They want them all for themselves, you see." Billy put his hands on his hips, his small brow furrowed. "Well, that's not very nice of them," he declared, a flicker of indignation in his eyes at the thought of being excluded from a secret. The idea of delicious hidden berries and the tantalizing notion of being in on the secret quickly overshadowed any lingering caution. "Which way do I go?" he asked, his voice now eager, completely falling for Sly's manipulative words. Sly the Fox gave a silent, satisfied grin. He merely extended one long, slender paw, pointing a clawed digit towards the same dense, shadowy undergrowth at the edge of the chestnut forest where Nutmeg had disappeared. "Just head straight that way," Sly purred, his voice dripping with false helpfulness. "You can't miss them." Meanwhile, Sammy, his small lungs burning from the effort, had poured all his energy into running. He pushed himself harder than he ever had before, weaving through the trees, leaping over roots, and ignoring the prickle of pine needles under his paws. He saw Nutmeg's bright fur just ahead, a flash of movement almost swallowed by the deeper shadows of the forest's perimeter. With a final burst of speed, Sammy managed to catch up with her just as she was about to enter the thickest part of the forbidden woods. He grabbed her tail lightly to get her attention. Nutmeg stopped, startled, and turned to see Sammy panting behind her. "Sammy!" she exclaimed, her eyes still wide and bright with that strange, almost feverish excitement. "What are you doing here?" Sammy gulped for air, his chest heaving. "Nutmeg," he wheezed out, trying to catch his breath. "Where are you going? Why are you running out here?" Nutmeg's eyes, still shining with that curious, almost dreamy excitement, widened even further. She took a tiny step away from Sammy, as if guarding a precious discovery. "Oh, it's a secret, Sammy," she whispered, her voice brimming with importance. Sammy, still trying to catch his breath, knew this was serious. "A secret?" he gasped, pushing himself closer to her. "What kind of secret, Nutmeg? Why are you running out here? This isn't a safe place to be." He knew he had to insist, to get her to tell him what was happening. Nutmeg looked around as if checking for eavesdroppers, even though they were alone. She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a hushed, excited tone. "Okay, but you have to promise not to tell anyone, especially the adults. It's just on the other side of the chestnut forest, towards the very edge. There's a place that has the best and juiciest nuts and berries that you've ever tried. The fox told me." She paused, her little nose twitching with delight at the thought. "But we have to keep it a secret," she said, "because it's just for us, the young squirrels." A cold knot tightened in Sammy's stomach. He knew the danger. He knew the adults had warned them about the edge of the forest. He looked at Nutmeg, her face so happy and trusting, completely unaware of the fox's true intentions. "Nutmeg, no," Sammy pleaded, his voice urgent. "We shouldn't keep secrets like this. We should go tell the adults right away. The fox. He's not being nice." But Nutmeg's happy expression twisted into a look of hurt. She put her small paws on her hips, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Sammy," she gasped, her voice sounding wounded. "But it's a secret. If you're my true friend, then you won't tell on me. Friends don't tell secrets, especially when it's about something so special just for us." Sammy hesitated, caught between the growing fear in his heart and the heavy weight of Nutmeg's words. To tell would mean breaking her trust, perhaps losing the fragile thread of acceptance he sometimes felt from the other young squirrels. To not tell. But the danger! He stood there for a long moment, the rustling of leaves around them suddenly seeming ominous. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Sammy turned around. He couldn't go with Nutmeg into that forbidden area, not with the fox involved. But he also couldn't bring himself to tell on her. He began to walk slowly back in the other direction, heading towards the familiar, albeit now unwelcoming, spot where the game of Kick the Nut had been playing. As he walked, his little head down in thought, a growing sense of alarm washed over him. He kept noticing young squirrels. One by one, then in pairs scurry past him, their faces lit with a similar excited curiosity to Nutmeg's. They were all heading in the exact same direction that Nutmeg had taken, towards the dangerous edge of the chestnut forest. Slice's wicked plan was working, luring them all away, one by one. Sammy reached the spot where the game of Kick the Nut had been, now silent and empty. He sat down, curling his small tail around his paws, and tried to sort through the jumble of feelings swirling inside him. He thought about Nutmeg, so happy and secretive, running off to a place she wasn't supposed to go. He thought about the fox, Sly, with his smooth, whispering voice. As he sat there, the feeling of exclusion, of always being left out, began to fester into a quiet anger. Why didn't they want him to play? Why didn't they tell him about these secret berries? A new, confusing thought popped into his head. Maybe Nutmeg wasn't going because of the fox at all. Maybe she just wanted to find the berries for herself, to keep them all to herself, and that's why she wanted to keep him away and said it was a secret. It wasn't fair. Sammy felt torn. On one paw there was the fear, the firm instructions from the adults not to go to the edge of the forest, the unsettling presence of Sly the Fox, and the real danger that might be out there. On the other paw there was an aching, powerful want, the want to be included, to be part of something exciting, to share in a secret with the other young squirrels, to prove he wasn't just the smallest squirrel who couldn't keep up. He was stuck between the fear of not following instructions and knowing it could be dangerous, and the desperate want to be part of the people, to be part of the group. His longing for acceptance, for just one moment of belonging, began to outweigh his caution. Taking a deep breath, Sammy finally made up his mind. With a fresh resolve, he pushed himself to his paws. He decided to go ahead and start heading in that direction, towards the forbidden edge of the chestnut forest. He would see what this secret was all about, and maybe, just maybe, he could finally be one of them. Chapter 7: The Dusty Shed. With his mind made up, Sammy took off, no longer just walking, but scurrying purposefully towards the forest's edge. Each rustle of leaves beneath his paws, each shadow stretching long between the trees, made him hesitate for a moment. The warnings from the adults echoed faintly in his memory, but they were quickly drowned out by the insistent beat of his own desire to belong. He pushed through thickets of bramble and leaped over moss-covered logs, following the faint sounds of excited chattering that now seemed to emanate from the forbidden zone. Finally, after what felt like a very long journey, Sammy pushed aside a curtain of thick ivy and emerged into a slightly more open space. His heart did a little leap, but not of joy. There, spread out before him at the very boundary of the chestnut forest, near a line of ancient gnarled trees that marked the edge of what was known, were indeed lots of little squirrels. Dozens of them. They were chattering excitedly, some already exploring the unfamiliar plants and sniffing at the ground, their tails twitching with curiosity. They were all the same young squirrels who had been playing Kick the Nut just moments ago, now all drawn here by Slice's tempting whispers. Sly the Fox, who had been waiting patiently, now moved to the center of the chattering group of young squirrels. He gestured with his nose towards an object tucked away beneath the gnarled roots of a particularly ancient oak tree. It was an old, dilapidated shed, its wooden planks warped and splintered, its single small window crusted with layers of grime and cobwebs. A thick layer of dust seemed to cling to every surface, and the air around it felt stale and uninviting. And there, Sly announced, his voice smooth and almost melodic, is where you'll find the treats, the very best nuts and berries ripened just for you, hidden inside for safekeeping. Billy, his fur a nervous twitch, looked at the shed with wide, trembling eyes. I don't want to go in there, he squeaked, his voice barely audible. It's dark and spooky. Sly let out a soft, reassuring chuckle, stepping closer to the frightened squirrel. Oh, it's dark, little one, because it's a secret, he purred, his tail swishing slowly. It's dark so that no one will know the berries are in there. It keeps them extra special and hidden just for you. Wouldn't you want to be part of such a big secret? Another young squirrel, a bit bolder, wrinkled her nose. But it looks so dusty, she piped up, peering skeptically at the shed. And it doesn't look like a fun place to eat nuts at all. Sly's eyes glittered with a cunning light. He paused for a fraction of a second, his mind already racing, thinking of other things to say, other alluring words, other clever tricks to convince them to push past their instincts and go inside that dark, dusty shed. He would find just the right thing to say to lure them in. Sly the Fox widened his smile, a broad, unsettling grin that showed a flash of sharp teeth, though he kept his voice smooth and friendly. He surveyed the hesitant young squirrels, his eyes sparkling with cunning. Now, little ones, he purred, his voice oozing with false concern. You don't want to miss out on all this fun, do you? Because if you don't go in right now, you'll miss out on everything. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The adults will be coming soon, you see. They'll find the shed, and they'll steal all the delicious nuts and juicy berries for themselves. They'll eat them all and won't share a single one with you children. This is your only chance to get to them before they do. At Sly's last words, a tiny spark of hesitation seemed to flicker in Nutmeg's bright eyes. She looked at the dark entrance of the shed, then back at the fox, a faint question forming on her whiskered face. But how do I know I can trust you? Nutmeg asked, her voice small but clear, voicing the doubt that might have been stirring in some of the other young squirrels as well. Sly didn't miss a beat. He let out a soft, almost wounded sigh, shaking his head sadly. He tilted his head, looking at Nutmeg with an expression of feigned innocence. Oh, little Nutmeg, he purred, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. Have I ever done you wrong in the past? Have I ever given you anything but good advice? His gaze swept over the other young squirrels, challenging them silently to contradict him. Nutmeg blinked, her brow furrowed slightly as she processed his question. But we just met, she pointed out, her voice a little confused, yet still holding a thread of her earlier doubt. Sly let out a soft, knowing chuckle. He nodded slowly, as if she had just made an excellent point. Yes, he purred, his eyes gleaming with amusement at her innocence. And since you've known me, little Nutmeg, have I ever done you wrong? Not once, have I? He spread his paws wide, as if inviting her to find fault, knowing full well she couldn't. At Sly's smooth, seemingly reasonable question, all of the little squirrels, including Nutmeg, paused. They looked at each other, then back at Sly. He had a point. They had only just met him, and in that short time he hadn't actually done anything bad. He had only talked about delicious berries and exciting secrets. With a soft, collective murmur of agreement, they all nodded their heads. No, you haven't, one chirped. You've been very helpful, added another. Convinced by Sly's deceptive logic and eager for the promised delights, the young squirrels, one by one, began to scurry towards the old, dusty shed. Nutmeg, still beaming with excitement, was among the first. They squeezed through the narrow, splintered opening, disappearing into the gloom within, their chitters and squeaks echoing briefly before being swallowed by the darkness of the shed. Chapter 8 Into the Trap. Once the young squirrels were all safely inside the shed, Sly the Fox moved with a quiet efficiency. He reached down and picked up a large flat stone, and with a grunt of effort, he leaned it against the opening of the shed, completely blocking the small entrance the squirrels had just used. Sammy, watching from his hiding spot, felt a fresh wave of anger. He's locking me out, Sammy thought, his small heart stinging. He's making sure I can't get any of those treats. Sly didn't notice Sammy. He turned and scampered around to the side of the shed. He reached into a hidden pocket in his fur and pulled out a small, tarnished silver key. He inserted it into a small, previously unseen door, turned it with a soft click, and disappeared inside. Inside the dim shed, Sly gestured towards some large metal cages in the corner. The best treats are right in there, he purred. The most delicious nuts are tucked way in the back, where it's safe and dry. Pip hesitated, looking at the dark, cold metal. I don't want to go in there, she whispered, her voice trembling. It looks scary. Me neither, Billy said, slowly backing away. It doesn't look like a nice place to eat nuts and berries at all. Sly leaned in close, his voice a smooth, comforting purr. Oh, little one, don't be afraid. The reason it's dark in there is because that's where the best hiding places are for the juiciest nuts. They stay fresh and cool away from the sun. Go ahead. Don't you want to be the first to find them?" Convinced by his words, the eager and unsuspecting young squirrels scurried right into the cages. As soon as the last tail was inside, Sly slammed the wire door shut with a triumphant grin, and secured it with a small wire latch. He then turned his attention to a large cast-iron pot sitting over a small fire. He began humming a low, wicked tune as he chopped up carrots, potatoes, and thick stalks of celery, tossing them into the bubbling water. As the steam began to rise and the water reached a rolling boil, Sly looked over at the cages. "Now don't you go anywhere," he said, his kind, relaxing voice turning into a menacing evil laugh, and then he turned and slipped out the side door. After Sly was gone, Sammy left his hiding spot. He reached the dusty, dilapidated structure and began to circle it, peering at the weathered planks. He noticed a small, knot-sized hole in the wall. Curiosity, fueled by his anger and the imagined feast inside, got the better of him. He squeezed his tiny head through the little knot-sized opening in the wall, calling out in a slightly muffled voice, "Hello? Are you in there? What are you doing?" Just then, before Sammy could pull back or anyone inside could fully react, a sudden, reddish blur appeared. It was Sly the Fox. With a swift practiced motion, Sly's paw shot out and grabbed Sammy by the scruff of his little neck, pulling him from the hole. Sammy yelped in surprise and fear. Sly didn't waste a moment. He swiftly took Sammy around to the other side of the shed, to the smaller, previously unseen door he had used. With a quick twist, he unlocked it, shoved the struggling Sammy inside, and then, with a triumphant grin, slammed the door shut. Sammy was plunged into a very dimly lit room. He stumbled, disoriented, his anger instantly replaced by a wave of confusion and a rising sense of dread. He heard panicked whimpers and frightened chitters echoing from the dim corners of the shed. Then, from the darkness, a chorus of tiny, terrified voices cried out, "Sammy! Sammy! Help us! We're trapped!" Chapter 9, The Empty Space. Sammy's heart pounded. He spun around, his eyes straining in the gloom. He could just make out the outline of the metal cages in the corner, and the frantic movements of the squirrels huddled inside. The realization hit him like a splash of cold water. This wasn't about hidden treats or being left out. They were in terrible danger. He scrambled over to the cage the voices were coming from. His paws brushed against the cold metal bars. He could see Nutmeg Billy and many other familiar faces pressed against the wire, their eyes wide with fear. The cage door was, indeed, shut tight. But as Sammy frantically felt along the edges, his small, nimble fingers brushed against a simple, rusty latch. It wasn't complicated, just a small hook that had swung into place. With a surge of adrenaline, Sammy pushed and wiggled, and with a soft click, the latch lifted. The cage door swung open with a low creak. For a moment, the squirrels inside hesitated, blinking in the dim light. Then, seeing their chance, they poured out of the cage in a torrent of fluffy fur. Nutmeg was the first, followed by Billy and the others. They swarmed Sammy. A cascade of warm, furry bodies rushed towards him, bumping into him, their tiny paws patting him, their grateful chitters filling the air. They were all talking at once, relief washing over their terrified faces. "Sammy, you saved us!" Nutmeg cried, nuzzling her head into his shoulder. Billy gave him a firm, appreciative hug. All the little squirrels pressed in close, burying him in a warm, furry pile, giving him a collective, heartfelt hug. Among the joyous flurry of grateful squirrels, one figure remained apart. Gus, his dark fur still ruffled, stood in the corner of the shed, his eyes narrowed. He watched the others clinging to Sammy, but he didn't move. He just folded his paws across his chest, a stubborn, unyielding expression on his face. He looked around the shed, his gaze falling on the small, knot-sized hole in the wall. All right, everyone clear out," Gus declared, puffing out his chest. "That hole in the wall, it's our way out. I'm the biggest and strongest, so I should go first." Gus immediately scurried over to the small opening. He braced his paws against the wall and tried to push his way through. He wiggled and strained, his fur scraping against the rough wood, but it was no use. The hole was simply too small for his broad shoulders. He pulled back with a frustrated grunt. Encouraged by Gus's attempt, though not his failure, other young squirrels, one by one, rushed to try the hole. Pip pushed her nose in, then Billy, then another. They squirmed and twisted, but no matter how hard they tried, nobody could quite fit through the tight opening. Their chitters of relief began to turn into murmurs of frustration and growing panic. One of the biggest squirrels challenged Gus. "You act like you know everything, but it didn't do any good this time, did it?" "Look, man," Gus shot back. "Don't you talk to me like that. I'll pull your tail off." Stop. Pip called out to the two arguing squirrels. "No time to argue. We have to think. We have to think. She looked around the room. "There's got to be another way out. her eyes fixed on the latch on the main door. "That's it. That's the way out. I'll handle this," Gus said as he went over and jumped as high as he possibly could, over and over again. But he just couldn't jump high enough. They all took turns leaping and jumping trying to reach the latch. But it was much too high. Suddenly, Nutmeg's eyes widened. "Wait," she cried out, looking around frantically. "Sammy! Sammy's the smallest. He can get through." All eyes immediately turned to where Sammy had just been, surrounded by their grateful hugs. They looked, then looked again, their hopeful faces falling. But Sammy was nowhere to be found. The space where he had just been, surrounded by their grateful hugs, was suddenly empty. The small, brave squirrel who had just freed them had vanished. A stunned silence fell over the shed, broken only by the distant bubbling of Slice Pot. Chapter 10, The Strength of the Forest. Just then, Sly came in and closed the door, securing it with the latch. The little squirrels ran back into the cage from fear. Sly went over to the cage, reached in, and grabbed Gus, slamming the cage shut as he walked away, but he didn't notice that it didn't close all the way. Sly the Fox, with a chillingly deliberate motion, held the struggling little squirrel firmly in his paw. He lifted him, dangling the tiny creature by its scruff directly over the large cast-iron pot, where steam billowed from the boiling, vegetable-filled water. The heat rose, intense and stifling. Gus let out a piercing, agonizing scream, his tiny legs kicking wildly in terror, his cries turning into frantic, heartbroken sobs. The sound of their friend's desperate cry ignited a furious courage in the other squirrels. Without hesitation, they burst out of the cage, a furry torrent of defiance. With a unified chattering fury, they swarmed Sly. They darted in, a whirlwind of brown and gray, running dizzying circles around the fox, nipping and biting fiercely at his ankles and paws. Their small, sharp teeth sank into his sensitive feet, causing him to yelp in surprise and pain. The unexpected assault, the sudden, stinging bites, made Sly instinctively flinch and jerk. He spun just enough to shake them off, his focus momentarily diverted from the squirrel dangling over the pot. And in that crucial instant his grip faltered. The little squirrel slipped from his paw, tumbling downwards. With a soft, lucky thud, it landed on the dusty wooden floor of the shed, instead of falling into the bubbling, boiling water. Suddenly, Sly let out an ear-splitting howl, a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the shed. It was a sound of pure, unbridled rage, and all the little squirrels instinctively cowered, scrambling back into the farthest corner of the room, their terrified whimpers filling the sudden silence. Sly, his eyes narrowed and his fur bristling, started to move towards them, baring his teeth and snarling. But just as he took a menacing step, a flash of brilliant blue zipped through the small, knot-sized hole in the wall. It was Jamie the Blue Jay. Jamie darted across the dim shed, his sharp eyes immediately spotting the door. Without hesitation, he flew directly to the handle, using his strong beak to expertly unlatch it. The door creaked open just as Sammy, his small face alight with urgent purpose, burst into the room. "Hurry! Hurry! Follow me!" Sammy yelled, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the lingering fear. Without a second thought, the young squirrels, seeing their chance, poured out of the shed, a blur of tiny bodies following Sammy into the open air. Sly spun around with a snarl, his eyes fixed on the escaping squirrels, lurching towards the open door to give chase. But before he could even reach the entrance, dozens and dozens of gray squirrels, the older and wiser ones from the morning gathering, came streaming through the opening. Sly bared his teeth and let out a loud growl, attempting to scare them back out the door. But it had no effect on the older, more experienced squirrels. They were a swirling tide of fur and fury. They swarmed Sly, running up his back, scrambling over his belly to his chest, their sharp claws finding purchase in his fur. They moved so quickly that he couldn't keep up. They bit him fiercely on his ears and his sensitive feet, not much different than their younger children had done earlier, but with one difference, coordination and experience, with much more force and viciousness. A more coordinated assault that made the fox yelp and stumble. Overwhelmed and disoriented, Sly cried out in pain and surprise as he lost his footing, falling backward with a heavy splash right into the large, bubbling pot of water. Steam hissed and rose around him. A group of the adult squirrels, working together with impressive coordination, quickly grabbed a long wooden ladle. With a few combined pushes and pulls, they managed to maneuver Sly out of the steaming pot. He landed with a wet thud on the dusty floor. Shaking and defeated, Sly dragged himself to a corner, his fur steaming from the heat, his body trembling. "Don't hurt me," he whimpered, his voice a mere shadow of its former cunning. The oldest and wisest of the gray squirrels, the one with the magnificent long white beard, stepped forward, his gaze firm and unyielding. "Go away, Sly. he rumbled, his voice carrying authority, and never returned to the chestnut forest. Outside, in the fresh air, all the young squirrels were gathered around Sammy, chattering excitedly, their relief palpable. Above them, Jamie the blue jay circled once, then landed gracefully on a nearby branch. Sammy looked up, a wide, grateful smile on his tiny face. He waved one small paw. "Thank you, Jamie," he chirped. Jamie dipped his head in acknowledgment. "You're welcome, Sammy," he chirped back. "Just let me know if you ever need me again." With a final ruffle of his blue feathers, Jamie took flight, disappearing into the vastness of the forest. Rusty, his eyes wide with amazement, scampered over to Sammy. "Sammy!" he exclaimed. "How did you get away? Where did you disappear to?" Sammy gave a little shrug, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Well," he explained, "while all of you were arguing about who could go out the hole, I had already run out through it. I was trying to get your attention to let you know that I was going for help, but I couldn't get anybody's attention. So I went off and got help." Rusty, his eyes shining with admiration, reached out a paw and gently patted Sammy on the shoulder. All the squirrels cheered, a loud, joyful chorus that echoed through the sun-dappled clearing. Nutmeg, her face alight with a rediscovered eagerness, bounced on her hind legs. "Come on," she chirped excitedly. "Let's go play Kick the Nut." With a unified burst of energy, all the young squirrels took off, scampering towards the familiar playing grounds deeper within the chestnut forest. Sammy, feeling a lightness he hadn't known in a long time, ran with them, his small legs pumping, a wide smile on his face. As they streamed through the trees, Sammy, still a little overwhelmed by the sudden acceptance, accidentally bumped into Gus. Sammy's small body jolted from the impact, and he stumbled, his heart immediately raced. Gus reached out a paw. His expression was soft, almost hesitant. He gently helped Sammy regain his balance, pulling him steady. "Come on, Sammy," Gus said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You can be on my team." The end.